Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and a belated Happy New Year. This is my first show in 2024. Kind of excited about that. I'm Frank Zaberick, the host of Frankly Speaking, and in the words of that great game show host, Steve Harvey, of the show Family Feud, we've got another good one for you today, ladies and gentlemen. I guess like people, especially on today's show, like we have a lawsuit, like especially like in a divorce or custody case, you're going against a lawyer that's, fairly, probably, you can assume they're fairly well experienced on their profession and stuff like that. They know the law backwards, forwards, and sideways. And it's especially intimidating, I would assume, to represent yourself pro se. But I guess it's an old cliche that goes, if you, anybody who would represent themselves, in a court of law has a fool for a client. But I think the person who made that statement never really took into consideration how much lawyers and courts charge to have a court suit. So especially if you love your kids, you're going to go to court and do the best you can. And we have two gentlemen here today that did just that. First, we have Tim Bickford, not a stranger to Frankly Speaking. You were on about almost 5 years ago to talk about the fathers' rights movement of New Hampshire, and then about a month later to talk about the alimony situation in New Hampshire.
That's right.
So, Tim, how you doing today?
I'm doing good, and thank you very much for having me on the show. I really enjoy being on your show, so thank you.
Yeah, and we also have, along the same lines, since my title of this episode is Divorced Dads Get Justice Against Their Ex's Lawyer. And especially, what's especially good that if you went pro se, the pro se route, is if somehow, some way that you brought the lawyers, their ex-wives' lawyers to justice, or the opposing lawyer to justice, somehow, some way. And these two men accomplished just that. And we have another guest here who's going to talk about that, Dan Shepard. And now both you guys, the lawyer in questions, they're headquartered out of East Kingston, New Hampshire. I assume that's like a suburb of Portsmouth in that neck of the woods.
East Kingston's a small town just south of Exeter. Very small community. It's near Kingston and Seabrook, that area. So it's a bit rural.
Mm-hmm. Ah. So Dan Shepard, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Oh, excellent. And also, I assume in your cases that, in your particular case, you're emancipated. Your divorce and child custody took place in 2012?
I think it went final in 2007. So it goes way back. But the issues with my ex's attorney went on for a bit of a while after that, and my ex also tried to extend alimony and some other things. So the divorce was final, but it seems in some cases it's never fully goes away. I mean, I've been done with it for a while now, and it's completely over with. My kids from that marriage are in their 30s, so everything is and well
you still
behind.
have a good rapport with you. First of all, do you have like a son, daughter, or is it, how many kids do you have?
A boy and a girl.
Boy and a girl, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and you still see them for birthdays, Christmas, whatever, holidays?
Yeah, my daughter and I were very close. So my son has been more distant, but yeah.
Does you were told me that since then your ex-wife has passed away.
Yes.
So even though your son is distant, he's just kind of doing his own thing, so to speak.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fine. That happens, and
Right.
anybody.
Right.
But tell me, before we get into your personal testimonies here, tell me a little bit about going pro se. That's going to be extremely intimidating. But if you won't have like the retainer fees, the $25,000 retainer fees, whatever they charge, and not to mention the $200, $300 an hour.
Right. That's pretty typical. So in my case, Frank, I filed for divorce in the spring of 2010, and it ended. The divorce ended in 2012, but as Dan kind of alluded, his divorce ended in 2007. But it doesn't always end. Things perpetuate. So I went from 2010 all the way up to recently, in and out of litigation in my case. So more recently, I filed a petition for a modification in child support since my oldest daughter was to become emancipated. And at that point in time, I just decided that I was going to go pro se. I just was tired of paying legal fees for something that should be as simple as you pay the guidelines. So, but it is a difficult process, pro se, because most people don't understand the laws. They don't understand attorney ethics rules. In my case, I didn't understand some of the procedures that I was about to attend a hearing and didn't realize it was a scheduling hearing. So it does have its challenges, and if you're going up against a skilled attorney and you don't know what you're doing, it's tough. And a lot of people just can't simply afford an attorney, a $3,000 retainer, and like you said, $250 to $300 an hour. It doesn't take long.
Yeah.
And then you're in the hole. So it is not easy. Some people do it very well. I've seen a lot of success with people pro se, and I've seen some disasters. And I decided towards the end of this latest round to eventually hire counsel because I just felt that I wasn't going to be able to accomplish what I wanted to accomplish because I didn't have the knowledge.
And you feel like kind of like the same way, Dan?
Yeah, going pro se, any family court matter is a highly emotional case to litigate. And when you're representing yourself, you have to focus on the law and get the emotion out of your own way. And it's very hard to do. I can remember some where the law had certain check boxes you had to meet in order to get certain outcomes. And I had the law in front of me. I had all of the facts and evidence in front of me, but you start getting that surge of adrenaline and you're trying to check the boxes and you want to make sure you've included all of the different pieces of evidence, and your mind just races. And it's hard to stay in a calm state to make sure you go through everything in proper order and make all of the appropriate points. So it can be done.
Yeah.
But you've got to discipline yourself to shut off the emotion, stick to what the law states, and present evidence in a way that it supports checking off the boxes.
Wow. And I never, the two lawyers here in question, I guess in your situation, Dan, you had Kerry Marshall, which we'll get into in a second, and she owns, I guess, for a law firm in East Kingston, New Hampshire, called Marshall Law. And there's a little placard, a little shingle on her building and stuff like that. And I guess she was suspended. Well, probably after your case, we're going to hear your testimony in a second, for like unethical behavior, as the ADO called it or whatever. And then there's another attorney that I guess was hired by Marshall Law, Brian Kenyon. And he was the only practicing lawyer at that firm for a while. And you had experience. Did you know Brian Kenyon?
No, never met him and hadn't even heard of him until recently.
Okay, right. But you dealt with both Kerry Marshall and Brian Kenyon.
Correct. Right? So in 2010, when I filed for divorce, Carrie Marshall at the Marshall Law Firm represented my ex-wife. And I've had to go up against Carrie Marshall for up until 2018. And then this more recent round where I filed a petition to modify child support, my ex-wife used Brian Kenyon. So I kind of, as things progressed, I figured out the reason why. I believe it's because Carrie Marshall resigned in 2000, I think it was March 2022. She resigned under investigation by the ADO. So that explained to me why Brian Kenyon was now representing my ex, because he works at that law firm. So that was the first time I'd never even heard of him either up until that point.
So not knowing, well, one thing I know about these two, I've never met them, I wouldn't know them from a can of paint. Carrie Marshall is apparently in her either young 60s or mid 60s, and Brian Kenyon is probably 70-something, in his young 70s, early 70s.
Right.
So when they got disbarred or suspended, whatever, if they were smart lawyers, they probably had a 401k back when they first got their law degree. Well, you wouldn't know that. It's hard to say.
Right.
But by all indications, they still want to practice law even at the time of suspension or disbarment.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if, once Carrie Marshall resigned, what her plans or aspirations were. But I can tell you that
she still has a building and a shingle in front of her building.
Right. And just to back up a little bit, Dan and I are good friends. And the reason that I met Dan was because Dan took issue with Carrie Marshall and filed a complaint against her in 2012. And I didn't know this. Actually, in 2012 was when my case was wrapping up. But in 2014, I went online and I was just doing some research, and I stumbled upon Dan's case, which to me is fascinating because I had to deal with Carrie Marshall, and seeing what Dan went through and what he did and how he accomplished it. I didn't know that you could go to the attorney discipline office if there was a violation. I thought the judges took care of all that. So through Dan's case, it really got me thinking. And one of the reasons why, I more recently filed a complaint on my own is because of what I learned from that case. And I studied other cases as well. But I think Dan's story speaks volumes to what can go on with attorneys. And I'd hope that Dan would explain a little bit about it.
But before we get into that, okay, when you guys were representing yourself pro se, Carrie Marshall and Brian Kenyon strike me as the type of lawyers that even though they're going against somebody who's representing themselves pro se, they're probably going to fluster you guys as best they can to get you guys maybe to swear, to yell or something like that, and get you off kilter. Did you see a lot of objection, Your Honor? Mr. Bickford here is hearsay. Mr. Bickford here is irrelevant.
All my appearances are. I have recordings of my appearances. I paid to obtain the recordings. I haven't transcribed them all, but there's definitely no doubt that it's a typical tactic that lawyers use, and family court especially, that, let's bog it down, let's slow things down. Whether or not that's something that's everyone experiences, I don't know. But in my experience, all I can say is that it shouldn't have taken nearly the time, it shouldn't have taken the money that it took to accomplish something that's very basic. The state has guidelines for child support payments. The state has guidelines for alimony. It shouldn't take 2 years to arrive at something so basic. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think it kind of does. I mean, if it takes that long, then things are being more likely dragged out. And it's sad because, when you're going through that, you don't know what your life is going to be like. Your life is on hold. You don't know how many days a week you're going to see your kids. You don't know how much money you're going to have. You don't even know where you're going to live. And this is all being dragged out in front of you. So the anxiety And at the same time, if you're representing yourself with that anxiety, it can eat you up. And it's unnecessary. It's completely unnecessary. And it's unfortunate that good people have to experience that when it should be as simple as, you don't want to be married anymore. Let's split the assets. Let's arrive at, alimony or child support based on what the state says. But things will drag out for years over $200. It's crazy.
One thing about both Kerry Marshall and well, in your case, just Brian Kenyon. You never met Brian Kenyon. Those lawyers know exactly what you guys gross per year to the penny.
That they
Did
do.
they ever use that and saying, if you loved your kids, you'd pay even more for child support than what the state prescribes?
Right. So I can actually comment on this because it's part of the record. And by the way, I want to make it clear that anyone that's interested in the case against the ADO with Brian Kenyon, they can obtain those records for free by going to the Supreme Court. Bring a thumb drive with you. You can download all the files. You can also reach out to the law library in New Hampshire. But I can speak to your point. There was a letter that's in the exhibits that Mr. Kenyon wrote. I think it was to my counsel that talked about my household income, including my wife's income, which has no bearing on child support, but it's saber rattling in my opinion. And to me, it's just another waste of time and money and resources. It's irrelevant, but it's a tactic that I think a number of family court attorneys use. I'm guessing. I've experienced it, and again, that is in the public record, so it's right there for people to see. And the law doesn't say you should use your spouse's income. Now, it does say if you're purposely underemploying yourself, or maybe you should be making $80,000 a year and you're making 20, then they'll consider your spouse's income. But that wasn't the case in my case. I've been employed by the same employer since the divorce started. So, but those type of tactics happen, and it's a shame that they should even be allowed to happen, but it does.
Wow.
Yeah.
So when they mention something like that before the judge, saying, Mr. Bickford here makes $150,000 a year gross, he should pay a lot more than what he does on the state's. I mean, you just grin and bear it, or do you say objection? We should just go by the guidelines here.
Right. I think it depends on the judge sometimes, but in my recent case, again, I have all the audio files, and I've listened to them a couple times. I mean, the judge was pretty much going to assign the guidelines, which they should do.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of it is to try to settle before you go to court, and maybe some of it's intimidation, but these lawyers will make these arguments, and it's tough. If you're pro se, I mean, sometimes you just don't know what to do. You don't know how to come back. But those arguments are made all the time.
So when you were pro se versus when you had a lawyer representing you against Mr. Kenyon and Miss Marshall, you saw maybe like 100-degree difference on how they reacted to your lawyer, because they knew the protocol and they knew.
I would say that's accurate. That's accurate, yeah.
So when you guys first approached it, what was your first, did you go to like the New Hampshire law books, or did you go to google.com, or? Yeah,
I think just to kind of memorialize everything that's happened, it would be great to hear what Dan has to say, because his interaction with the ADO started in 2012, and mine started in 2022. So it might be a good segue to explain. It's a little complicated.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it's okay if Dan.
Okay. That was gonna be my next thing, to have Dan give his testimony on how your case. in all disclosure here, I did see you were on the Kevin Avard Speak Out show back in 2012. Kevin Avard also has a show here on the Nashua Public TV. And you were telling some of the circumstances in your case. And it was, so I guess Kerry Marshall, because she is supposed to communicate with you on different documents and different procedures that take place in the court, and you were supposed to have a hearing, and then you said you never got notified of that hearing, and yet Kerry Marshall. Well, anyway, you give the testimony of how that came about.
I mean, I had a 6-inch binder of things that I went to the attorney discipline office on, and you couldn't even quite close the cover. And there were about a half a dozen key points in the binder. I put together all the evidence and so on for the ADO. But the one that they focused on, there was an assented to motion that Kerry filed with the court. The court had come out, and as I recall, it was they picked a date for a hearing on a Tuesday. They mailed it out. And on Friday, per the date stamp, Marshall had responded with an assented to motion, which is an assented to means both parties have agreed to what was in the motion, which was to pick a certain date because she had a conflict, as I recall, with the date the court was suggesting. And I definitely did not agree to the motion. I didn't want that because I wanted to do additional discovery. So I wanted a longer time frame. And the court denied me because it's like, you assented to this date. And I said, well, I've never assented to it. And Marshall is, you agreed to the date. It's an assented to order. We, spoke to him by phone and he agreed. So that was kind of that. And I'm like, I know I didn't agree. And of course, at that point, your mind is racing. Could I have somehow forgotten it? No. Could they have left a message? Well, no, because they said. And so I pull my phone bill, and it's like, oh my God, of course. Landlines don't have itemized bills anymore, so I wouldn't even be able to prove that they never called. And then one day I noticed, wait a second, if the court mailed it on Tuesday, they would have only gotten it on Wednesday. If theirs response was time-stamped on Friday, and it wasn't the normal window stamp. So I asked around, I said that was probably the mailroom stamp. I said, okay, that means they had to drop it in the mail on Thursday. So between Wednesday and Thursday, they had to read the court's order, contact me, write up the motion, and put it in the mail. And I noticed on my calendar that my wife had a double cornea transplant surgery that Wednesday. We had to, as all surgeries, you're down there at like 6 in the morning, and she had complications, some pain. So I was there until like 8 at night. I went home because we had pets, was back down before sunrise practically the next day. I was there the whole day, and I looked at my cell phone bill. There was not a single blocked call with caller ID, and not a single call I couldn't identify, and none of them came from Kerry Marshall or any of her people. So it's like, I now have evidence, but she's going to say, well, we called them at home. So I contacted my mobile provider, and I got all the cell tower data. This is what it took to beat this. So I could prove 6 in the morning, I'm pinging the Newberry cell tower, and then I'm in the Boston cell, and then I'm in the Cambridge cell all day, and you could see. So I could prove definitively where I was because of the cell tower record, and I had the phone bill to show they never contacted me, and I could isolate Wednesday and Thursday as the only days that it could have happened. And they just happened to be the 2 days that my wife was in the hospital in Boston. So with that information, I challenged them to sign an affidavit swearing to the fact that they contacted me. I even prepared it and left some blanks for them to fill in and sign it. And they did it. And I thought they took the bait. So I went to the East Kingston Police Department. I said, these are the professionals. Let them now investigate it. And sure enough, that was the thing that the Attorney Discipline Office focused on. which I think was quite reasonable for them to do. So.
And then when you were testifying, I mean, what you had said on Kevin Avard's show back in 2012, I believe was the recording of the show, Kerry Marshall and your then ex-wife, put you through hell and back.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
I mean, you lost custody. You actually lost custody of kids when you went pro se.
Yes.
And they usually don't like to do that.
No.
And your ex-wife was telling your daughter, I guess, that you were a homosexual?
She was telling that all over town.
Oh, so not just your, wow.
Yeah. And she had the children involved to the point where I had to barricade myself in a room at one point, and when she would pry the door open, she would literally push one of my children between the door and the door frame so I couldn't close it. She left the marital home in a pair of handcuffs over that incident, but she was trying to get me taken out. It was, in fact, the police, after the first incident, took me aside and said, look, we deal with this a lot. If I were you, I'd make sure, always have a piece of furniture between you and her, and don't engage. Just, it was a pretty crazy time. So yeah, I initially got custody, but she did not relent, and it just went on, and she ended up getting custody transferred back to her, but she and her, the boyfriend that she was having the adulterous affair with, they would go off for the weekend. So my kids would come home from Winnicott High School, and they'd have the whole house to themselves all weekend till she'd come back the following Monday. And if they were to be unsupervised, she was required to let me know so I could have custody. I never knew anything about it. So that was the kind of thing that was going on.
And in your situation, too, there was a guardian ad litem involved investigating both you and your then ex-wife?
Yeah.
And they probably talked to your kids as well.
Right. And
wow.
Yeah.
And that's how they determined to have the custody go to your ex-wife. Yeah. And just out of curiosity, now, did your ex-wife work at the time?
She did, but it was a very low-paying job. And in fact, the reason I wanted to do the extra discovery I mentioned is I started finding things to indicate she had a second job. And in fact, I ultimately got her bank records and went through. I could see every direct deposit because they had my wages garnished. So I could see every single payment I made. I could see all her paychecks direct deposited, and yet there was over $100,000 of additional money that went through the account. And it was one of those types of things. So it was pretty wild, but you get through it eventually, and you think that you'll never be on your feet again. But I've now remarried. I wonderful woman. I have a 7-year-old daughter, and she and my daughter from the first marriage are true sisters, and they're very close. And my daughter from the first marriage and my wife even are very, very close. So, in fact, she's getting married this summer, and my wife will be her maid of honor.
That's
wow,
great. That's great.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
So you can recover from this stuff, but to get through it, you've got to get the emotion aside. You've got to focus on the issues. And dealing with Kerry, I talked to one lawyer early on, just, considering hiring, and they said, here's my retainer that I'll require. And say, who's opposing counsel? I said, Kerry Marshall. I said, I'm going to double that retainer because she has such a reputation for lots of motions and very costly litigation. I didn't go with that lawyer, but it's rough. I mean, some people, I guess, play it that way, and it's a shame. But that's why I dug in my heels and really went to fight back against Marshall. I had one situation where when the divorce went final and the first support payment was to be made, I can remember it. I got my first paycheck of the year. It was in January, it was the first one. I got paid on the 12th, and I sent the check out. And then on the 24th or thereabouts, I get a motion saying you have to appear for an emergency hearing. The motion from Marshall was stamped, I believe it was the 23rd. They didn't even give me the 10 days that you're normally supposed to get from when a motion is to when you appear in court for you to respond. It was like something like 3 days, as I recall, somewhere around there. And we're in there, and I said, look, I sent the check. And they said, we haven't gotten any money for the month of January. It was even written in the motion. We have received no monies for the month of January. And what can you say? It was the end of the month, so I hadn't even gotten a bank statement. Although if they never got it, it wouldn't appear there. And they're saying, so they went and had my wages garnished. And I was advised that the garnishment is a wonderful thing in your case because now they can't dispute anything. It turns out when I got the bank statement, they cashed the check on the 17th, almost a full week before the date stamp on the motion. But that's the kind of thing that happens. And later on in the litigation, when I found out she was going around town and saying all these things about me, deadbeat, I had to garnish his wages, I went back into court and said, look, I haven't been fighting this because it was suggested that it's easier if I don't have to touch the checks. But I'm not going to be slandered around the community as a result of the garnishment. So I presented the bank statements and the garnishment was lifted. So the court, when I finally decided to pursue it, did reverse it. But that's the kind of thing I was putting up with. And that was one of the arguments I put in my case to the Attorney Discipline Office.
Getting back to when you first got your divorce and they awarded you custody of your children.
Well, I had the custody from the initial filing when she was taken out of the home. But they continued to fight that, and the custody was later reversed before the divorce was final. So she then took custody of the children while the divorce was still being litigated.
So I guess they awarded you the custody when she started getting kind of nutty and putting the kids between you and the doorway.
Right.
But so they logically did that.
Right.
Because they usually don't reverse it. That's weird.
But then
they were.
My son became so agitated that they came in and said that he and I were like oil and water, and you can't separate the kids, so you have to take both kids and put them with the mother. I wasn't in the household. I don't know what was being said, but from what I was observing, my conclusion was always, they're just fanning the flames as much as they could to just keep things out of control.
When you first did get custody of your kids, did your then ex-wife pay you child support?
No. I had the marital home. I had the kids. And
you're a nice guy. Yeah. I think if it was my case and my ex-wife was working, I think I would have her pay something into the child.
Well, my income was a lot larger than hers. Oh. And I don't know when she started working with the dental office, which is where I believe the extra money had come from. But in the end, it was, it's one of those things. I made a point of trying not to keep the kids involved in the whole matter. I tried to keep it separate, but if you're being that way and the other side is not playing by the same rules, it can be really hard.
Wow. Okay, moving right along, Tim, let's hear your testimony here on how you. No, I guess you learned from him, learning from ADO records on how to.
Right. So I did. I like I mentioned earlier, I read about Dan's case. I think it was in 2014, and then I went to the ADO website to really get all the details. And so I was kind of aware in the back of my mind that you can, if there are ethics violations, you can go to the ADO. But at that time, I wasn't in litigation. But it wasn't until 2022 when I filed a petition with the Rockingham County Court for a reduction in child support that then Brian Kenyon was representing my ex-wife, so I was representing myself pro se. And as going through the process, at one point I'd received some letterhead from the office that had Brian Kenyon and Carrie Marshall listed as active attorneys, and I was sure at the time that she wasn't an active attorney, but it was right there in black and white. You know, she's an attorney, so it really kind of made me a little bit uneasy because I mean, obviously she was familiar with the case, and I didn't know what was going on. So at some point thereafter, I hired counsel because, you know, I just didn't think I could accomplish what I wanted to accomplish, and which was I just wanted the guidelines. I just wanted the guidelines.
Yeah.
So my attorney eventually received, and by the way, again, this is all in the public record, Supreme Court files. My attorney received interrogatories from the martial law office, and when I read the interrogatories, it was really clear. It said, return all responses to counsel Carrie J. Marshall, and I'm thinking, okay, well, maybe she's not. Maybe she is still practicing law. So my case wrapped up, you know, a month or two after that. So it was at that point, you know, I decided to report it because, you know, you can't have it both ways. You're either not an attorney or are an attorney. So I reported it to the Attorney Discipline Office, and they took action. And like I said, there's a lot of records at the Supreme Court, and it was just the tip of the iceberg from what I can tell. When I examined the records, they asked a lot of questions. The ADO asked a lot of questions, and it's really, in my opinion, has opened up. There's an old saying, you know, with there's smoke, there's fire. There's a lot of fires. And again, all I know is what I've read. You know, I'm not allowed to, you know, to be involved in any of the case. It's the ADO against, you know, Brian Kenyon. So really what it comes down to is Brian Kenyon was representing my ex-wife, and Carrie Marshall was allegedly a paralegal. So she resigned under investigation in 2020, in March of 2020, and then maybe it was 2022, losing track of the dates. But anyway, she reinstated her business as a paralegal business. So as Brian Kenyon being the only attorney at the firm, it's his responsibility to supervise the non-attorneys. It's also illegal to own a law firm if you're not an attorney. So this has really opened up a lot of interesting...
Now, did you pursue the Attorney Discipline Office complaint against Kenyon and Marshall, or did your lawyer...
No, I did. And in fact, I didn't even inform my lawyer I was going to do it. I mean, my case, we settled, my case was over, you know, and I felt they were breaking ethics violations. There was ethics violations, and it was my duty to report it. So I reported what I knew to the ADO, and like I said, if you look at the files, Mr. Kenyon's been accused of a lot more than I thought he was going to be, because at the time all I knew was that they were representing Carrie Marshall as an attorney. But it seems to me like, you know, she was not supposed to, you know, own a law firm. She's not a lawyer anymore. He was supposed to be supervising her, and it's apparent from what I've read that wasn't happening. At least that's my interpretation of it. So right now, the Supreme Court actually moved to suspend him. They did suspend him, and it's my understanding that presently he's opted to resign under investigation, and that's all I know. That's all I know, yeah.
And according to some of the material you gave me, one that was posted in the Granite Grok, which I guess is like a statewide blog, so to speak, to tell you about news items
right.
and things that are happening in the state. And they reported quite a bit. I think they were like I couldn't find any newspaper recordings of that. I don't know if the Portsmouth has a daily newspaper, or they won't touch it because they were afraid of getting sued. I don't know.
It seems like the press doesn't really want to cover these types of things, but I was shocked to see the Granite Grok cover it. I was just shocked to see anyone cover it, and it was It was well done. I think it was well done.
Yeah.
I think it was very factual. It was, from what I could tell, very factual. So I'm glad someone's reporting on it. And I, you know, it's for the good of the public. I mean, if you drive by that law firm and you pull in to hire an attorney, you should be aware of what you're about to get yourself into. So I'm glad that someone spoke up, and I'm glad that they wrote an article about it.
And then in that Granite Grok article, other than y'all, you two, they mention another individual, Michael Kimball.
Right, right. The mysterious Michael Kimball, who I don't know. I've never met him, never spoke with him. But a few months or so after I filed my complaint with the Attorney Discipline Office, which they wrote to me and said they were investigating, out of nowhere comes another complaint from a Michael Kimball. And again, this is on the record. He testified in an affidavit in a complaint that he had an appointment at Marshall Law, and he met, again, this is all on the record, he met with Carrie Marshall for a little over an hour. He testified that he received legal advice. He was alone, testified he was alone with her. He testified that she made a filing with the court, electronic filing on his behalf, which he didn't know at the time. He thought it was an appearance for her to represent him, but she actually filed for him to represent himself. So his testimony says he left that office feeling like he had an attorney. And by the way, his case was over him potentially losing some property. So a couple months goes by, and he testified that he tried to contact the law office to find out what was going on. And before you know it, he received a default notice from the court, basically saying, your case is over. You never showed up. And he's like trying to get a hold of the law office. What's going on? And when he did, he testified that he talked to Carrie Marshall, and she said, I'm not a lawyer. And he's like, well, there's a sign out front that has your name on it. You never told me you weren't a lawyer. And then, the ADO is like, why is she meeting with, she's a non-lawyer, why is she meeting with a client by herself? So this poor guy, lost the case. He had to retain a new attorney out of Hampton. That attorney turned around, reached out. By the way, I forgot this part. Eventually, Carrie Marshall put Brian Kenyon on his case, and Brian Kenyon wrote to him saying, we can't help you. So this guy goes to a lawyer in Hampton, and the lawyer's like, well, I'm going to need your files. He reaches out to Marshall Law. They can't find the files. Brian Kenyon, again, in the record, he's saying, can you give me some clues? What was the case about? They couldn't find the file for this guy. And he just wrote him a letter saying, I can't represent you. I can't do anything for you. And then they can't find the file. So this poor guy is trying to reopen the case to another attorney. So he filed a complaint with the ADO. And as soon as he did, it seems to me, based on what I can tell, that's when the ADO went directly to the Supreme Court asking for immediate suspension, which that happened. That happened, yeah.
Unbelievable. But you've never personally met Michael Kimball?
Never. I don't.
Never
don't know what he looks.
No,
I don't. Never met him ever. No. Not yet.
Okay.
I'd like to meet him.
Yeah, he sounds like an interesting guy.
Yeah.
I wouldn't mind having him here on Frankly Speaking.
Right.
That'd be an interesting interview, I think. But one thing, now, in defense of both Brian Kenyon and Carrie Marshall, I don't know if you looked at other things on the internet about those two, but they seem to be equally hated and disliked about moms who got bad raps. I guess they were represented by guys. They represented fathers, and they messed over the mothers for custody. But long story short, they were put on the wall of shame.
Right.
And what's this? I don't know. There was a thing here about the mothers. The mother's thing about I got it written here somewhere, but maybe I forgot to write it down. But anyway, they went after them, and that's a nationwide thing.
Right.
And then for New Hampshire and Rockingham County, they got both Kerry Marshall and thing on the wall of shame.
Any attorney that I could tell anywhere in the United States that's been disciplined ends up on that site. It's an interesting site because it's based on whatever's in the case of attorneys in New Hampshire, they base it on what's in the ADO's database, so they're reporting factually, but they are opinionated. They certainly don't mince words when it comes to their opinion of someone that's broken attorney ethics violations or committed violations. But there's also other things online. There's a lot of reviews about the firm online that are that were mentioned in the Granite Grok, by the way. If you go there, you can click on them. A lot of interesting opinions, a lot of interesting feedback that doesn't show that law firm in a very positive light.
Yeah. And by the way, I just found out it's the protectivemothersrevolution.org that posted this wall of shame. Okay. But it's interesting because, like, we were talking off camera here just before this show started with a guy who was a former lawyer, and I was saying, because my opinion is always that the guys always get the short end of the stick in a divorce, especially with these child custody concern. But it seems like these two shysters, these two unethical, allegedly unethical attorneys, Brian Kenyon and Kerry Marshall, are more than willing to take fathers who are going through child custody cases as well as taking mothers. Right.
I've never known, heard any reputation about that law firm just representing, females or males. I think they probably, I don't know this for sure, but probably have a pretty good mix. I mean, at the end of the day, someone walks in your office and they're willing to, pay your fees. I think a lot of attorneys are just going to accept the client. And I don't know whether or not, females make out better in family court. I like to think that it's gotten better. But I just don't have enough experience with it. In my case, I've had female attorneys, male attorneys, and they were all willing to represent me. So, yeah.
Yeah. After my case went through the ADO and Marshall got her sanction, I started getting calls periodically from people saying, "I'm going up against Marshall. How did you do it?" And I was always careful to say, I'm not a lawyer. I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you what my thinking was in going through this matter. And they were men that were opposing Marshall and women that were opposing Marshall. So it was a mix. Right. I was always happy to share with them what I had done with the ADO, but
right, and I've had some. When I was on the Fathers' Rights movement, I was a member of the Fathers' Rights movement in New Hampshire, and in my role was just to help people, and like Dan said, we can't give legal advice. I didn't give legal. I'm not a lawyer. I wouldn't even know how to give legal advice. But from time to time, I would be helping someone. I'd meet with them for coffee, and they'd say, "Yeah, my ex's attorney is Kerry Marshall," and I'd just be like, "Oh boy, I guess it's wonderful to have an attorney like that if all you care about is winning don't care what it takes to win. So I felt bad for a lot of these people because they would share their experiences with me about, this order or that petition or this petition, and you just go, oh boy, So I've made a few friends by doing this, some people like Dan, and there's a few others that just really good people that just unfortunately, are tied up in this system.
Yeah. Yeah. Just out of morbid curiosity, I got to ask this question. I guess it could go either way. Because, I mean, when you're going through a divorce and stuff like that, and you have limited conversations with your soon-to-be ex at the time, and when you were going through, like, pursuing disciplinary action on Kerry Marshall or Brian Kenyon, did your ex confront you, or did you confront your ex about what their discipline problems were, or did you kind of let them figure it out for themselves?
No, because there's you have no obligation to. In my case, I felt like there was ethics violations. I had no obligation to notify my ex. At the time, I essentially wasn't pro se. I just settled the case with my attorney. So I was under no obligation. I don't know if my ex knows about it. It doesn't really matter. It's really a matter between the Attorney Discipline Office and Brian Kenyon at this point. So
okay,
it's like like seeing being a witness to a crime on the street. You report it, and then the police take over and they investigate it. You're just reporting it. But like I said earlier, with this smoke, there's fire, and boy, there's a lot of it. There's a lot of fire, and there's a lot of ethics violations that the Attorney Discipline Office has alleged, to the point where, Mr. Kenyon is elected to
like
resign.
When you're picking up the kids or something like that, your ex-wife says to you, well, Tim, thanks a lot. Thanks a whole bunch for telling me about my ethically challenged lawyer. I'll never marry you again.
That might have happened.
That happened in my case. We would go into court, and my ex, at one point, she started having to represent herself as well, and she would complain that I was dragging her lawyer through the attorney discipline process. Now, normally, that's when you see the other counsel go, objection, Your Honor, it's relevant and all this. And I just kept my mouth shut because I knew I couldn't suggest these things. But she kept bringing it up every time, saying he's dragging her through, and it didn't really mean anything until one time she complained that her lawyer wouldn't work for her anymore. I don't know if that was true or not, but that was what she had said one time, and even complained that I had gotten her sanctioned, and the judge sort of looked at me like, she was sanctioned? It's like, hey, I didn't introduce this. She did, but yes, that happened. And there was definitely, at least I felt, the tone kind of changed. It was though all this time I was looked at as bringing up all these false accusations, and once the ADO stepped in with the sanction, it was like, maybe this guy was saying the truth all this time.
Right.
And I definitely felt that the tone changed at that point, and things came to a conclusion, it seemed, more quickly. But,
Okay, a couple more quickies. We got about, for 4.5 minutes left to this episode. I mentioned earlier that the first time you came here 4.5 years ago,
right,
you were representing the Fathers' Rights Movement of New Hampshire. Right. And talked about that. My question is, does that still exist, and do they still have a Facebook page?
It does.
I couldn't find. Do they change the Facebook address?
It does still exist. I'll get you the link so that you can post it with this show on YouTube.
Okay.
It does still exist. I'm no longer a participant in it, only because at some point you get burnt out. You've got to move on, and there's only so much you can do to help people. People just don't have the resources, they don't have the money, and every case is different. You just kind of get burned out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and one quick question in reference to, you probably have your views on Trump, Biden, et cetera, in 2024. I'm not going to get into the nuts and bolts of that.
Right.
But in 2022, the Christmas before last, there was a situation with President Biden having 6 stockings. He had 6 stockings of grandchildren on the White House fireplace, and the 2 for the dogs. The 2 dogs that kept biting Secret Service agents. Wow. And there was a 7th grandchild, illegitimate, that Hunter has an illegitimate daughter in Arkansas. And President Biden wouldn't recognize that. Is that, I mean, we talked before on the father's rights thing about, you know, some guys are schmucks. Any schmuck can father a child.
Right.
But it takes a certain kind of person to be a dad. But a granddad, I mean, should have at least some type of, you know, at least acknowledge an illegitimate child.
Right. Yeah, I don't know if his son has this child. I don't know if he has the child or not. But, and I would say if President Biden knew this, then I would have hung the stocking.
Yeah.
But
just for the press and anybody else who goes in the White House can see that. And
right. I mean, that's something that he wouldn't even have to comment on. He just hang it. You know what? He doesn't. He's got plenty to do. So.
Definitely, especially now, yeah.
But if I could, I just wanted to mention one thing.
Okay.
If I could, you know, known Dan as long as I've known him, and we've had a lot of conversations, and we kind of both have come to the same conclusion that we just want a level playing field in the courts. You know, personally, I have no problem with paying child support at the guidelines or whatever the law is. I have no problem with that. Just want an even playing field, and that's all I ever wanted. But it's unfortunate that it's not like that. It can get out of control, and when there's ethics violations, like I said, the judges typically don't rule on that. You've got to go to the attorney discipline office, and as Dan alluded, you have to be organized. You have to have a case. You have to show a clear violation. But at the end of the day, I just wanted a fair. I hate to use the word fight, but I wanted a fair fight. And I've never felt like I've had that opportunity.
Just out of curiosity, the Attorney Discipline Office is located in Concord, I would assume?
Yes.
Okay, and one more thing. You emailed me like on Sundays and holidays of stuff you got from the Attorney Discipline Office. Are they actually working in that office on weekends and holidays? Or did you just happen to send me?
So anything I've sent you, I got from the Supreme Court or the New Hampshire Law Library.
And you had it for a while?
Yeah, I probably, because you had asked me about doing a show, and I probably had just sent it to you, you know.
Oh, okay. Yeah. At first I thought, are they actually working on Sundays and holidays?
Right.
But that didn't make sense.
Right.
So time flies when you're having fun, eh?
Right.
My studio director just told me that we're just about out of time. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I hope this show has been a blessing. And stay tuned next time, ladies and gentlemen, for another episode of Frankly Speaking. Thank you very much.